How did a single botched move turn the biggest star of the Attitude Era into a ticking time bomb? How did a muscle tear prove that Superman was mortal? And how did one wrestler's back injury come with a bonus personality makeover? We'll cover 9 career-defining injuries that didn't just change individual wrestlers. They changed the entire direction of WWE. By the end, you'll understand why doctors' offices became more dangerous than wrestling rings. Stone Cold's neck injury. What if the biggest star in wrestling history was secretly dying in the ring every night for 4 years? That's exactly what happened to Stone Cold Steve Austin after one botched move at SummerSlam, 1997. Owen Hart was supposed to deliver a simple sit-down piledriver to Austin during their Intercontinental Championship match. Instead, Hart sat down too early and drove Austin's head straight into the canvas with the full force of both men's body weight behind it. Austin's neck was broken, but he had to crawl across the ring to finish the match. The crowd had no idea they were watching a man with spinal damage complete a championship bout. Austin later said he couldn't feel his arms or legs for several terrifying seconds after the move connected. He managed to roll Hart up for the victory, but backstage, doctors told him his wrestling career should be over. Austin went from being a high-flying technical wrestler to a brawler who could barely take bumps. Before the injury, he was doing suplexes, flying attacks, and complex technical sequences. After SummerSlam, he had to completely reinvent his moveset while pretending everything was fine. The company's biggest draw was literally falling apart, but WWE couldn't afford to lose him during the Monday Night Wars. Austin became a master of smoke and mirrors. He went from stunning everyone in sight to stunning very selectively. Watch his matches after 1997 and you'll notice he rarely takes back bumps or does high-impact moves. The Stone Cold Stunner became his primary finish because it required minimal physical risk to his damaged neck. Austin had to become increasingly creative about hiding his limitations. He started using more weapons, more brawling, and way more talking to cover for what his body couldn't do. The irony is that his injury made him a better character. The desperate edge in his performances wasn't acting. It was real fear that any bump could end his career. Austin's promos became more intense because he knew his time was limited. Every match could be his last, and that urgency translated into compelling television. He developed a harder-hitting style that worked around his physical restrictions while making him seem more dangerous than ever. Austin's neck injury didn't just change his wrestling style, it created the blueprint for how top stars work through career-threatening damage while staying on top. He proved that adaptation could be more powerful than raw athletic ability. This injury proved that sometimes the most devastating moves happen outside the script, and the real drama comes from watching someone fight through actual pain while the world assumes it's all part of the show. John Cena's tricep and pectoral tears. The man who built his career on never give up had to do exactly that when his own body betrayed him not once, but twice. John Cena was WWE's Iron Man, the guy who never missed shows and never complained about anything. He worked through pain that would sideline other wrestlers and showed up to every event no matter what. Then his tricep decided to detach from his arm during a match with Mr. Kennedy on Raw in October 2007, and suddenly the most dependable performer in the company discovered he wasn't indestructible after all. For a company that had built their entire business model around Cena's reliability, watching their workhorse discover he was mortal was terrifying. WWE had structured their entire programming around the fact that Cena would always be available. He was the guy they could count on to work hurt, to carry storylines, and to be the face of the company every single night. When doctors told him he needed immediate surgery, WWE executives probably felt their stomachs drop because their safety net had just disappeared. Cena's first major injury came at the worst possible time. He was carrying the company during a transition period when other top stars were dealing with their own problems. The WWE Championship was around his waist, and suddenly, Superman needed surgery that would keep him out of action for months. What happened was that his tricep muscle completely separated from the bone during a routine spot with Kennedy. The injury was so severe that continuing the match was impossible. His return timing was more accurate than most WWE booking decisions. Cena would give recovery estimates to fans and media, then hit those dates almost exactly, which became a running joke among wrestling fans who were used to injury timelines changing constantly. These injuries actually helped Cena's character development in unexpected ways. Fans who had grown tired of his apparent invincibility suddenly saw him as human, and it made his eventual comebacks feel more meaningful and earned than his previous championship runs. Triple H's quad tear, 2001. Sometimes a career-ending injury creates a better character than a healthy body ever could. Triple H's quad tear didn't just change his wrestling style. It transformed him into wrestling's ultimate villain. During a tag team match on Raw in May 2001, Triple H went for a simple move and felt both of his quadriceps muscles tear away from the bone. His legs literally rolled up into his hips. The injury was so severe that his thighs basically disappeared as the muscles bunched up near his waist. Instead of stopping the match, Triple H finished it on legs that weren't working. The visual of him trying to stand became one of wrestling's most brutal moments. He kept attempting to get to his feet while his legs gave out underneath him. The crowd didn't know what they were watching at first. Triple H would try to stand, collapse, then try again. His determination to finish the match while his body was failing him created a moment that fans still talk about today. The 8-month recovery period gave Triple H time to think about his character in ways he never had before. He went from being an athletic performer who relied on his physical abilities to studying the psychology of wrestling. During those months away from the ring, he watched tapes of legendary wrestlers and learned how they controlled crowds with their minds instead of just their bodies. He realized that the best villains weren't the strongest or the fastest, they were the smartest. When he returned at Madison Square Garden, he was a different person. The injury had made him more cerebral, more calculating, and somehow more dangerous than when he was healthy. His comeback was perfectly orchestrated. Triple H had learned that the mind games were more important than the physical games. He started using psychology to manipulate both his opponents and the audience in ways he never had before. The reign of terror that followed wasn't just booking decisions. It was Triple H applying everything he'd learned during his forced sabbatical from the ring. His matches became more about storytelling and less about athleticism. He would spend entire matches working on his opponent's psychology instead of just trying to out-wrestle them. The injury had forced him to become a better wrestler by making him a worse athlete. Triple H's quad tear proved that sometimes career-threatening injuries create better characters than healthy bodies ever could. The game learned that real power comes from the mind, not the muscles, and his injury became the foundation for his most successful character run. His time away from wrestling taught him lessons that turned him into one of the greatest heels in company history. Edge's neck fusion. The Master of Surprise had his biggest shock be a tearful retirement speech, proving that cervical fusion surgery became wrestling's most feared career-ending diagnosis. Edge was at the peak of his career in 2011, fresh off a World Heavyweight Championship run and delivering some of the best work of his entire career. He had just finished a fantastic storyline with Alberto Del Rio and was positioned as one of WWE's top heels. Then doctors discovered spinal stenosis that could paralyze him with one wrong bump, and everything changed in an instant. For a wrestler whose entire character was built on taking risks and seizing opportunities, being told he could never take another bump was devastating. Edge's whole gimmick revolved around being the ultimate opportunist who would do anything to win. He was famous for his ladder match performances and his willingness to put his body on the line for spectacular moments. The idea that he couldn't risk even a simple back bump was completely against everything his character represented. Edge's retirement speech the night after WrestleMania 27 was more emotional than most championship victories. Grown men in the audience were crying as he struggled to get through his announcement. You could see the genuine pain in his face as he talked about having to give up the thing he loved most. The crowd gave him one of the loudest reactions of his entire career, and it wasn't for a heel turn or a surprise attack. It was pure respect for what he had given to the business. The diagnosis was particularly cruel for Edge because he had just hit his creative peak. His recent work with Chris Jericho and John Cena was career-defining stuff that showed he could hang with anyone in the company. He was having the best matches of his life and developing new layers to his character that made him more interesting than he had ever been before. Cervical fusion surgery meant that his neck vertebrae would be permanently fused together. One wrong move could leave him paralyzed or dead. What made it worse was that Edge felt fine most of the time. He wasn't in constant pain like other wrestlers dealing with major injuries. The danger was invisible but absolutely real, lurking in medical scans rather than showing up as obvious physical problems. His farewell appearances became a celebration of a career cut short by medical reality rather than creative decisions or fan interest. Edge's neck fusion showed that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones you can't see. The Ultimate Opportunist's final cash-in was trading his wrestling career for the ability to walk normally for the rest of his life. Daniel Bryan's concussion saga. The ultimate underdog story got interrupted by actual medical science, proving that sometimes doctors hold more power than creative teams. Daniel Bryan was wrestling's most passionate performer when repeated head trauma started causing seizures and memory problems that couldn't be ignored. For a wrestler whose entire identity was built on never giving up, being told his brain was damaged was the ultimate betrayal by his own body. Bryan's concussion issues were particularly scary because they affected his personality. His wife Brie noticed he was becoming forgetful and irritable at home. She would find him staring blankly at walls or getting angry over small things that never bothered him before. The man who was known for his positive attitude and endless energy was turning into someone his family didn't recognize. These changes happened gradually, which made them even more frightening. The WWE medical team failed him multiple times, clearing him to wrestle when independent doctors said he should retire immediately. WWE's doctors would run their tests and tell Bryan he was fine to compete. Then he would visit specialists outside the company who would look at the same results and tell him his career was over. The mixed messages created a nightmare situation where Bryan didn't know who to trust or what was actually happening to his brain. His 2016 retirement speech was more emotional than most championship victories because fans knew they were watching someone give up their dream. Bryan stood in the ring and talked about how wrestling was all he ever wanted to do. The crowd chanted, "Thank you, Bryan," while he struggled to get through his announcement. You could see the genuine pain in his face as he talked about having to walk away from the business he loved. Bryan spent 2 years fighting doctors, getting second opinions, and desperately trying to prove he could wrestle safely again. He visited specialist after specialist, hoping someone would tell him what he wanted to hear. He changed his diet, tried new treatments, and did everything possible to heal his brain. Most doctors told him the same thing: his wrestling career was finished. The breakthrough came when he found doctors who understood that not all concussions are the same, and that brains can heal with proper treatment. These specialists looked at his case differently and realized his brain had actually recovered better than anyone expected. His 2018 comeback made doctors everywhere question their degrees because Bryan returned better than ever after supposedly career-ending brain damage. Daniel Bryan's concussion saga proved that medical science is still learning about brain injuries, and sometimes persistence pays off in unexpected ways. The Yes Movement's forced intermission became a story about hope and the power of refusing to accept a diagnosis as final. Sting in WWE. What happens when wrestling's most mysterious icon finally steps into the ring he avoided for 2 decades, only to have his body betray him? Sting's WWE career lasted exactly 395 days, but one buckle bomb from Seth Rollins turned the icon into a cautionary tale about waiting too long to chase your dreams. Sting had spent 14 years rejecting WWE's advances, choosing loyalty to WCW's memory over Vince McMahon's money. When he finally signed in 2014, fans thought they were getting the supernatural Sting who had terrorized the NWO. Instead, they got a 56-year-old man whose body was held together by 2 decades of punishment and sheer willpower. Turns out, avoiding WWE for 2 decades doesn't stop Father Time from collecting what he's owed. His WrestleMania match with Triple H was everything fans had imagined, until you realize Sting was moving like his joints were filled with concrete. The match was designed to hide the fact that the franchise player could barely keep up with modern WWE's pace. He was wrestling through chronic neck problems that had been building for years, but nobody wanted to admit their childhood hero was running on fumes. The Seth Rollins match was supposed to be Sting's redemption story. Instead, it became a medical emergency in real time. One buckle bomb later, and Sting's neck decided it had absorbed enough punishment for 3 lifetimes. His arms went numb immediately, and he couldn't feel his hands for several terrifying seconds. The man who had survived decades of Vader powerbombs got taken out by a routine spot that Seth Rollins did 15 times per match. The spinal stenosis diagnosis was WWE's worst nightmare coming true. Their newest legend had suffered the same career-ending injury that had forced Edge into retirement. The vertebrae in Sting's neck were pressing against his spinal cord, creating a medical emergency that required immediate surgery. One wrong move during that match could have left him paralyzed permanently. Sting's cervical fusion surgery meant his wrestling career was over before it really began in WWE, Shawn Michaels' back injury. Sometimes career-ending injuries come with personal transformation packages, and Shawn Michaels got the ultimate personality makeover along with his back problems. A casket match bump at WrestleMania 14 compressed Michaels' spine so badly that doctors told him his wrestling career was over at age 33. The showstopper's back gave out just as his ego was reaching peak toxicity, creating a perfect storm of physical and personal crisis that would change everything about who he was. Michaels had been wrestling through back pain for months before WrestleMania, popping pills and developing an attitude that made him nearly impossible to work with. He was showing up to events high on painkillers and causing problems with other wrestlers backstage. His behavior had become so bad that wrestlers were complaining to management about having to deal with him. The back injury was just the final straw in a career that was spiraling out of control because of his personal problems. The injury forced him to confront not just his physical limitations but his personal demons. He couldn't wrestle, couldn't walk properly, and couldn't hide behind his character anymore. For the first time in years, Michaels had to face himself without the protection of being the Heartbreak Kid. He was stuck at home, unable to perform, and forced to deal with all the issues he had been avoiding through wrestling and drugs. His 4-year retirement became a journey of personal discovery that included finding religion and completely changing his approach to life. Michaels spent time with his family and started going to church regularly. He got clean from the painkillers and began working on becoming a better person. The man who had been one of wrestling's biggest jerks was learning how to be humble and considerate of others for the first time in his adult life. When he returned in 2002, fans barely recognized him. The arrogant show-off had been replaced by a humble performer who put others over. His comeback matches were technically limited because of his back problems, but they were emotionally powerful because fans could see the genuine change in his character. Michaels was no longer trying to steal the spotlight from everyone else. Instead, he was using his experience to help younger wrestlers look better. His comeback run proved that sometimes the best character development happens outside the ring during forced retirement. Mr. WrestleMania's 4-year hiatus showed that career-ending injuries can be career-saving transformations if you're willing to change everything about yourself. The injury didn't just fix his back problems, it fixed his life. Bret Hart's stroke and concussion. Wrestling's most technically gifted performer discovered that precision means nothing when your brain stops working properly. Bret Hart's career was destroyed not by one big injury but by a series of head traumas that culminated in post-concussion syndrome and a stroke. For a wrestler whose entire identity was built on technical excellence, losing cognitive function was worse than losing physical ability. Hart's problems started with a concussion from Goldberg's botched kick at Starrcade 1999, but the damage had been building for years. What happened was that Goldberg threw a superkick that caught Hart right in the head. The kick was thrown with full force and connected perfectly with Hart's skull. Hart finished the match but said later that he knew something was seriously wrong. The concussion symptoms started immediately and never really went away. The stroke in 2002 was the final blow to a brain that had absorbed decades of punishment. Hart lost feeling on his left side and struggled with speech for months afterward. He would try to talk and the words wouldn't come out right. Simple conversations became frustrating battles against his own brain. The man who used to call matches with perfect timing couldn't even order food at a restaurant without difficulty. What made Hart's situation tragic was that his mind had been his greatest asset. He could call matches on the fly and execute perfect technical sequences without missing a beat. Hart was known for being able to work with anyone and make them look good because he understood wrestling psychology better than almost anyone else. His brain was like a computer that could process information and adjust strategies instantly during matches. The post-concussion syndrome affected his memory, his balance, and his ability to process information quickly. These were all things that made him great as a wrestler. Hart would forget conversations he had just finished having. He would lose his balance walking across a room. Processing simple information took much longer than it used to, which was frustrating for someone who had always been mentally sharp. Hart became an advocate for wrestler safety, using his medical problems to highlight the long-term costs of head trauma in wrestling. He started speaking out about the dangers of repeated concussions and how wrestling companies needed to take brain injuries more seriously. Hart used his own experience to warn other wrestlers about what could happen if they didn't protect themselves better. Bret Hart's stroke and concussion showed that technical skill can't protect you from the cumulative effects of brain damage. The Excellence of Execution system crash proved that even the smartest wrestlers aren't immune to the long-term consequences of repeated head trauma over decades in the ring. Mick Foley's accumulated damage. Decades of punishment turned Mrs. Foley's baby boy into a walking medical textbook, proving that retirement matches kept happening because his body kept finding new ways to break down. Mick Foley's career was built on absorbing punishment that would kill normal people, but eventually even his superhuman pain tolerance had limits. The hardcore legend's body became a collection of injuries rather than a functioning athletic machine, yet he kept coming back for more punishment. Foley's injury list reads like a medical encyclopedia: concussions, separated shoulders, broken ribs, pulled muscles, and teeth knocked out by steel chairs. His ear was ripped off during a match in Germany when it got caught in the ropes. He lost multiple teeth to chair shots over the years. His shoulders were separated so many times that they would pop out during normal activities. His ribs were broken and rebroken so often that breathing deeply became painful. His famous Hell in a Cell match with The Undertaker left him with a concussion so severe he doesn't remember most of the match. What happened was that he took two massive bumps that should have ended his career. First, he was thrown off the top of the cell through the announce table. Then he was chokeslammed through the top of the cell onto the mat below. The second bump knocked him unconscious and dislocated his jaw. A tooth went up his nose during the fall. The running gag of Foley's retirement matches became reality because his body literally couldn't handle what his mind wanted to do. He would announce his retirement, then come back months later because WWE needed him for a storyline. Each comeback was shorter than the last because new injuries would pile on top of old ones, creating a cascade of physical problems. His body would break down faster with each return. Foley's accumulated damage became part of his character. Fans cheered for him because they knew he was sacrificing his body for their entertainment. They could see the toll that hardcore wrestling was taking on him. His injuries weren't hidden or worked into storylines. They were real and visible and getting worse every time he stepped through the curtain. Mick Foley's body count proved that hardcore wrestling extracts a price that keeps compounding over time. The hardcore legend's accumulated damage showed that sometimes retirement matches never end because bodies don't heal the way storylines do. His career became a cautionary tale about the long-term costs of extreme wrestling. Rey Mysterio's knee reconstructions. Multiple knee surgeries threatened to ground wrestling's greatest high flyer, proving that extraordinary athleticism comes with an extraordinary physical bill. Rey Mysterio's knees absorbed decades of punishment from high-flying moves that defied gravity and common sense. Every 619, every springboard move, every Hurricane Rana landing put tremendous stress on joints that weren't designed to handle that kind of repeated impact. For a wrestler whose entire moveset depended on his legs, knee problems were like taking away a pianist's fingers. Mysterio's first major knee surgery came at the worst possible time. He was being pushed as a main event player and had just won his first World Heavyweight Championship. WWE was finally giving the ultimate underdog the spotlight he deserved, and then his knees started falling apart. The timing couldn't have been worse for both Mysterio and the company that was counting on him to draw viewers. The reconstruction surgeries became a regular part of his career, with each one threatening to be the last time he could perform at his peak level. What happened was that Mysterio would have surgery, recover for months, then return to wrestling only to injure the same knee again. The cycle repeated itself multiple times over the years. Each surgery involved removing damaged cartilage and repairing torn ligaments that couldn't handle the stress of his high-flying style. What made Mysterio's knee problems particularly challenging was that his entire wrestling style put maximum stress on the joints that were failing him. He couldn't just change his approach like other wrestlers who dealt with injuries. His character was built around being the small guy who could fly around the ring and do things bigger wrestlers couldn't do. Taking away his aerial moves was like asking him to wrestle with one arm tied behind his back. He had to modify his moveset after each surgery, finding new ways to be spectacular while protecting his reconstructed knees. Mysterio started doing fewer high-risk moves and more ground-based wrestling. He worked harder on his storytelling to make up for the athletic moves he could no longer perform safely. The multiple surgeries created a cycle where each comeback put more stress on knees that were already held together by surgical hardware. Rey Mysterio's knee reconstructions prove that high-flying wrestling styles have built-in expiration dates. The physics of repeatedly landing on damaged joints eventually catch up with even the most gifted performers. The Ultimate Underdog's Achilles heel showed that even the most resilient performers can't escape the reality that extraordinary athleticism comes with an extraordinary physical price that must eventually be paid. These 9 injuries prove that the most compelling storylines in wrestling history weren't written by creative teams. They were written by real pain, real fear, and real determination to overcome impossible odds. Austin's broken neck created the Attitude Era's biggest star. Cena's muscle tears made Superman human. Triple H's quad injury birthed wrestling's greatest villain. Edge's spinal stenosis ended a career at its peak. Bryan's concussions silenced the Yes movement. Michaels' back problems came with a personality makeover. Hart's stroke crashed wrestling's most precise mind. Foley's body became a medical textbook. Mysterio's knees couldn't handle decades of flight. Like and subscribe for 1,000 years of luck.